Hi, my name is Erica Peltier from 4th period Euro, and today we're going to be talking about the English Civil War and the Commonwealth of Britain under the rule of Oliver Cromwell. And some context to these events, we can start talking about the divine rights of king, which was that a ruler was given every right to have authority over his territory or empire, which was a God-given right, and absolutism, which Charles I, who was the monarch at the time, adamantly believed in. So in 1628, he signed the Petition of Rights, which gave Parliament the power to levy taxes, and if the king wanted to levy taxes, he had to get his support from Parliament. But when Charles I needed money because he was in debt from his lavish lifestyle and spendings, Parliament refused, and therefore he didn't call them for the next 10 years. So for a century, or for a decade, he led England without a parliament, until there was an Irish insurrection or rebellion where the people of Ireland who were Catholics wanted anti-discrimination laws put in place for them because the Anglican Church obviously did not like Catholics. So when Charles I wanted to raise an army against them, Parliament said, no, you haven't called us in 10 years, we're not going to support you on this. He decided to call on the army and troops against Parliament and basically say, if you didn't support me, if you're one of those people, like, you will be killed. So Parliament, who realized that this was such an overreach of power, started their own army, and people who supported them became known as the Roundheads, and they were named after the short-haired, round-headed people that were stereotypically in Parliament. And the Cavaliers were those that were loyal to the king. And so basically, when Charles I called the army on Parliament, that is when the English Civil War began. And following that, the new model army was raised for Parliament, and the leader of that was Oliver Cromwell, who was a gentry, who was a person of power or position right below the noblemen, so they still owned land, but they weren't nobility. So coming from this class, he was still able to secure a job in the army, and after several successful battles, he rose through the ranks, and eventually at the Battle of Worcester in 1651, Parliament beat the Loyalists, and they established rule over the country. But then Cromwell was put into power by Parliament, and he was known as the Lord Protector, and under this rule, it was something called the Major Generals. And so basically there were 10 districts or areas, and each one had a Major General, and they had the power to levy taxes and rule in that area. So Cromwell stayed in power because of the Major Generals and because he had that support, and the Major Generals were also heads of the army. So in case anything ever happened, he could just turn and put his support on them, and they could raise their own armies within their own districts. And so this actually did occur when the Irish had a lot of loyalists, and they were starting to form, and he wanted to put an end to that. And along with those political reasons, he had personal ones where he was a devout Puritan, and the Irish were still Catholic, and he wanted to get rid of them. So basically he fought and killed thousands of Irishmen, and after that he decided that he wanted to establish a reign of unity among among England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and he wanted to force the Puritan religion on all of them, which was the reason that the Irish rebelled once again. So he was successful, but then he died, and his son Richard Cromwell came into power. But Richard did not have a lot of support from the Major Generals, so he only reigned for a few years, before everything kind of fell apart and Parliament removed him. And this was called the Restoration, where Parliament brought back the monarchy, and in this case it was Charles II, who was the son of Charles I. And even though he saw his own dad beheaded by the Parliament, he wanted that position of power, and he thought that he could be a good king, so he came to power. And once that occurred, Oliver Cromwell was dug back up and beheaded, even though he had been dead for a few years. And that new age of enlightenment and believing began. But during the Commonwealth, things were pretty similar in the way things were ruled. There was a first parliament that Oliver created, but he then got rid of it because they were not supporting him enough in terms. And then the second one stayed until he died. A lot of historians look back at the Commonwealth period and believe it had significant history on England, and it was the one time where there was no monarch in rule and only a dictator, which is what he was, even though he wanted to call it a republic, which was not the case since he controlled parliament and the major generals could appoint whoever they wanted to that. And so yeah, that's basically it.